The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty road as Captain Maria Santos adjusted her bulletproof vest one final time. The convoy of 3 vehicles sat ready, engines humming quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. 23 soldiers from different units had been assembled for what seemed like a routine patrol through the contested region near the border. Intelligence reports suggested minimal enemy activity in the area, making it an ideal mission for the mixed unit to work together and build coordination. Maria had been leading soldiers for 8 years, but this was her first time commanding such a diverse group. The team included seasoned veterans from the Mountain Division, fresh recruits from the Coastal Guard, and specialist communications officers who rarely saw field action. She watched as they checked their equipment one last time, noting the nervous energy among the younger soldiers and the calm professionalism of the veterans. Sergeant Rodriguez, a grizzled fighter with 15 years of experience, approached her with the final equipment check. His weathered face showed concern as he pointed to the communication gear. The primary radio system had been acting up during the morning tests, producing static and losing signal intermittently. The backup system seemed functional, but the timing was less than ideal for a patrol into uncertain territory. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. They were to patrol a 20-mile stretch of mountain road, check 3 abandoned outposts for enemy activity, and return by sunset. Local villagers had reported strange movements in the area, but aerial reconnaissance showed nothing unusual. The route would take them through dense forest sections and open valleys, providing varied terrain that would test the unit's adaptability. As the convoy began moving, Maria felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had earned her rank through decisive action and careful planning, but every mission brought new challenges. The mixed nature of her current team meant she had to account for different training backgrounds, experience levels, and communication styles. Building trust and effective coordination would be crucial if they encountered any unexpected situations. The first hour of travel passed without incident. The mountain road wound through spectacular scenery, with towering peaks visible in the distance and morning mist clinging to the valleys below. The soldiers in her vehicle maintained alert silence, scanning the tree line and monitoring radio frequencies. Occasional chatter from the other vehicles confirmed that all systems were functioning normally, and morale remained high. Maria studied the terrain map spread across her lap, noting potential choke points and areas where the convoy might be vulnerable. Years of training had taught her to think like an enemy, identifying locations where an ambush would be most effective. The road ahead included several sharp turns and narrow passages where their options would be limited if trouble arose. She made mental notes of alternative routes and fallback positions. The communication issues became more apparent as they climbed higher into the mountains. Static increased noticeably, and several attempts to contact headquarters resulted in garbled transmissions. Sergeant Rodriguez worked frantically with the radio equipment, trying different frequencies and adjusting the antenna position. The backup systems provided some connectivity, but the range seemed reduced compared to normal operations. Halfway through their planned route, they reached the first checkpoint at an abandoned border station. The facility had been empty for months, but protocol required a thorough inspection before proceeding. Maria divided her team into search groups, ensuring each building was cleared methodically. The process revealed nothing more threatening than some wild animals that had taken shelter in the empty structures. During the inspection, Private Chen, one of the communications specialists, discovered something troubling. Electronic interference patterns suggested the presence of sophisticated jamming equipment somewhere in the area. The signals were subtle but consistent with military-grade systems designed to disrupt radio communications. This discovery transformed their routine patrol into a potentially dangerous situation requiring heightened alertness and modified tactics. Maria gathered her team, leaders, for a quick briefing behind one of the abandoned buildings. The intelligence failure was concerning, but they had trained for situations where information proved incomplete or inaccurate. She outlined new protocols for the remainder of the mission, including modified formation positions, enhanced visual communication signals, and predetermined rally points if the convoy became separated. The decision to continue the mission was not taken lightly. Returning immediately would be the safest option, but incomplete intelligence about enemy capabilities in the region posed ongoing risks for future operations. By proceeding carefully and gathering more information, they could provide valuable data for headquarters while maintaining reasonable safety margins for the current team. As they prepared to move to the second checkpoint, Maria noticed changes in her soldiers' demeanor. The relaxed confidence of the morning had been replaced by focused tension. Weapons were held more readily, scanning patterns became more systematic, and communication between vehicles increased despite the radio difficulties. The transformation from routine patrol to potential combat mission was evident in every aspect of their behavior. The road to the second checkpoint wound through the densest section of forest on their route. Tall trees created a natural canopy that blocked much of the sunlight, casting the convoy in perpetual twilight. Visibility was limited to perhaps 50 meters in any direction, making it impossible to spot potential threats until they were dangerously close. The narrow road prevented rapid maneuvering, creating exactly the type of vulnerable situation Maria had been dreading. Unknown to the patrol, enemy forces had been tracking their movement since early morning. Advanced surveillance equipment hidden throughout the forest provided real-time intelligence about the convoy's position, speed, and apparent mission objectives. The jamming equipment Private Chen had detected was only one component of a sophisticated trap that had been months in the planning. The enemy commander had chosen his ambush site carefully, selecting a location where the road curved sharply around a large boulder formation. Trees pressed close to both sides of the path, eliminating escape routes and creating perfect concealment for attacking forces. Multiple firing positions had been prepared at different elevations, ensuring overlapping fields of fire that would make the convoy's position untenable within seconds of the first shot. As Maria's convoy approached the carefully prepared killing zone, she felt an inexplicable sense of unease. Years of combat experience had developed her intuition about dangerous situations, and something about the forest around them felt wrong. The normal sounds of wildlife had disappeared, replaced by an oppressive silence that made every engine noise seem unnaturally loud. The first shot shattered the morning silence like thunder, striking the lead vehicle's windshield and sending spiderweb cracks across the bulletproof glass. Before anyone could react, the forest erupted in a storm of gunfire from multiple directions. Muzzle flashes lit up the shadows as enemy fighters opened fire from concealed positions among the trees and rocks. The carefully planned ambush had been sprung with devastating precision. Maria's vehicle lurched violently as the driver instinctively swerved, trying to avoid the incoming fire. The narrow road offered no escape routes, with steep embankments on one side and dense forest on the other. Behind them, the second vehicle had already taken multiple hits, smoke beginning to pour from its damaged engine. The third vehicle tried to reverse but found the road blocked by fallen trees that enemy forces had dropped across their escape route. Chaos descended upon the convoy as soldiers scrambled to return fire while seeking cover behind their damaged vehicles. The enemy had chosen their ambush site perfectly, creating a killing zone where the patrol had limited options for movement or defense. Bullets ricocheted off metal and shattered glass while Maria's mind raced through tactical options that all seemed equally hopeless. Sergeant Rodriguez was shouting orders to the nearest soldiers, trying to organize defensive positions despite the overwhelming enemy fire. Several team members had already been wounded, including Private Martinez, who was clutching his shoulder while blood seeped between his fingers. The communications specialist was desperately trying to contact headquarters, but the jamming equipment made any radio transmission impossible. Maria realized that traditional defensive tactics would only delay their destruction. The enemy held every advantage in terms of position, numbers, and preparation. Staying put meant certain death for her entire team. She needed to do something unexpected, something that would disrupt the enemy's carefully laid plans and create opportunities for survival. Through the gunfire and shouting, she noticed that the enemy forces seemed concentrated in three main positions. The largest group was positioned directly ahead, blocking their forward movement. Smaller groups covered the flanks, preventing any attempt to escape through the forest. However, their positioning suggested they expected the convoy to either retreat or dig in for a defensive fight. The lead vehicle was still functional despite the damage to its windshield and body. Maria made a split-second decision that went against every conventional military doctrine she had learned. Instead of seeking cover, she grabbed her rifle and sprinted toward the damaged vehicle, drawing heavy fire as she moved. Her unexpected movement confused the enemy for precious seconds, just long enough for her to reach the driver's position. Corporal Johnson, the original driver, had been stunned by the initial impact, but was otherwise unharmed. Maria pulled him from the driver's seat and took control of the vehicle, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had noticed something during her dash that might provide their only chance for survival. The enemy's main position was built around a natural choke point where large boulders narrowed the road to barely the width of a single vehicle. They had assumed this would trap the convoy, making it impossible to advance or retreat quickly. However, Maria had spotted what appeared to be a narrow gap between the largest boulder and the tree line, barely visible from their current position. She keyed the vehicle's internal communication system, knowing it would reach the other vehicles despite the radio jamming. Her voice was calm and authoritative as she outlined a desperate plan that would require perfect timing and absolute trust from every member of her team. There would be no second chances if anything went wrong. The plan required the second vehicle to create a distraction by concentrating fire on the enemy's left flank, while the third vehicle provided covering fire for their escape attempt. Maria would drive the lead vehicle at maximum speed toward the enemy position, using the damaged windshield and vehicle's armor to absorb the initial impact of concentrated enemy fire. Private Chen, despite his limited combat experience, volunteered to handle the vehicle's mounted weapon system while Maria focused on driving. His hands shook as he checked the ammunition feed, but his voice was steady when he confirmed his readiness. The other soldiers in the vehicle prepared for what might be their final mission, checking weapons and securing equipment for the violent ride ahead. The enemy forces had repositioned slightly during the brief lull in fighting, confident that the trapped convoy would eventually be forced to surrender or fight a losing defensive battle. Their commander was already planning the propaganda value of capturing or killing an entire patrol unit. The idea that anyone would attempt a direct assault on their fortified position seemed impossible. Maria took a deep breath and floored the accelerator, sending the heavy vehicle surging forward with a roar of engine noise and spinning tires. Enemy fire immediately concentrated on their windshield and front armor, creating a shower of sparks and metal fragments. The vehicle shuddered under the impact but maintained its forward momentum as Maria aimed for the narrow gap she had spotted. Behind them, the second and third vehicles opened fire according to plan, their concentrated shooting forcing some enemy fighters to take cover and reducing the amount of fire directed at Maria's desperate charge. Sergeant Rodriguez was coordinating the covering fire with hand signals, his experienced eye picking out enemy muzzle flashes and directing accurate return fire. The distance to the enemy position closed rapidly as Maria maintained maximum speed despite the incoming fire. Private Chen was firing controlled bursts at the main enemy concentration, his shots keeping some fighters pinned down, while others continued their desperate attempts to stop the charging vehicle. The gap between the boulder and tree line grew larger as they approached, confirming Maria's assessment that it might be wide enough for passage. At the last possible moment, Maria yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending the vehicle into a skidding turn that brought them alongside the boulder formation. Enemy fighters who had been positioned to fire down the road found themselves exposed to flanking fire from Private Chen's position. The sudden change in angle created confusion among the enemy ranks as their prepared firing positions became ineffective. The vehicle scraped against the boulder with a grinding noise of metal on stone, but Maria managed to squeeze through the narrow gap and emerge behind the main enemy position. For a few crucial seconds, they found themselves in the enemy's rear area with most of the fighters still focused on the road, where the convoy had originally been trapped. Private Chen immediately engaged targets of opportunity, his shots striking enemy fighters who were caught completely off guard by the vehicle's sudden appearance behind their lines. The tactical situation had been reversed in seconds, with the ambushers now finding themselves caught between Maria's vehicle and the remaining convoy elements that were still providing covering fire from their original positions. The enemy forces were thrown into complete disarray as Maria's vehicle emerged in their rear area, firing at point-blank range into positions that had been designed to repel attacks from the opposite direction. Private Chen's accurate shooting was devastating at such close range, forcing enemy fighters to abandon their carefully prepared positions and seek cover wherever they could find it. The psychological impact of the unexpected flanking maneuver was as important as the tactical advantage it created. Maria used the vehicle's momentum to continue the attack, driving parallel to the enemy's main line while Private Chen engaged targets systematically. The heavy vehicle's armor protected them from most return fire, though bullets continued to strike the hull with metallic pings and crashes. She could see enemy fighters retreating deeper into the forest, their coordinated ambush dissolving into individual survival efforts. However, Maria knew their advantage would be temporary. The enemy would soon regroup and adapt to the new situation, potentially surrounding her isolated vehicle, while the rest of her team remained trapped in the original kill zone. She needed to act quickly to exploit the confusion and create an opportunity for the entire convoy to escape the ambush. Through the chaos, she spotted the enemy's command position, hidden among a cluster of large trees about 50 meters from the road. Radio antennas and communication equipment were visible, along with several figures who appeared to be coordinating the enemy response to her unexpected attack. Eliminating the command element would significantly reduce the enemy's ability to reorganize and mount an effective counterattack. She swung the vehicle toward the command position, accelerating through the undergrowth and small trees that couldn't stop the heavy military vehicle. Private Chen focused his fire on the communication equipment, sending sparks flying as expensive radio gear was destroyed by high-velocity rounds. The enemy commanders scattered, abandoning their equipment and seeking cover in the deeper forest. The destruction of the command post created exactly the chaos Maria needed. Without centralized coordination, the enemy fighters began operating as individual units rather than a cohesive force. Some continued firing at the original convoy position. Others tried to engage Maria's vehicle, and still others began retreating toward predetermined rally points deeper in the forest. Maria immediately reversed course and headed back toward the road where her convoy remained under attack. The gap she had used to penetrate the enemy position was still passable, though enemy fighters were now attempting to cover it with sporadic fire. She radioed the other vehicles using the short-range internal communication system, knowing they needed to move quickly before the enemy could recover from their confusion. Sergeant Rodriguez had been monitoring the situation and immediately understood Maria's plan when she explained their narrow window of opportunity. The second vehicle, despite engine damage, was still mobile enough to follow Maria's route through the gap. The third vehicle would need assistance due to more severe damage, but the crew was prepared to abandon it if necessary to avoid capture. The coordinated breakout began as Maria's vehicle returned to provide covering fire for the second vehicle's escape attempt. Private Chen had reloaded and was ready to engage any enemy fighters who tried to block their exit route. The timing had to be perfect, as the enemy was already beginning to recover from their initial shock and reposition forces to counter the new threat. The second vehicle made its run through the gap with Sergeant Rodriguez, directing suppressive fire to keep enemy heads down. During the crucial moments of exposure, several bullet holes appeared in the vehicle's side panels, but the engine continued running and all occupants remained unharmed. The successful passage of the second vehicle proved that Maria's escape route remained viable despite enemy attempts to close it. The situation with the third vehicle was more complex. The engine damage made it impossible to maintain the speed necessary for a successful dash through the gap, and enemy fire was increasingly focused on preventing any further escapes. The crew would need to be evacuated on foot, a dangerous proposition given the open ground they would need to cross under enemy fire. Maria made another critical decision that demonstrated her commitment to leaving no one behind. Instead of securing her own escape, she drove back toward the trapped third vehicle to provide direct fire support for the crew's evacuation. This move put her vehicle back in extreme danger, but she knew that abandoning part of her team would haunt her forever, regardless of military regulations about acceptable losses. The evacuation of the third vehicle crew required precise coordination between all elements of Maria's team. Private Chen provided continuous suppressive fire, while Maria positioned their vehicle to shield the evacuating soldiers from the heaviest enemy fire. Sergeant Rodriguez organized the covering fire from the second vehicle, ensuring that enemy fighters couldn't advance to closer positions during the vulnerable evacuation process. One by one, the soldiers from the damaged vehicle sprinted across the open ground to reach Maria's position. Each crossing seemed to take forever under the intense enemy fire, but Maria's positioning and Private Chen's accurate shooting kept the casualty count minimal. 2 soldiers sustained minor wounds during the evacuation, but everyone successfully reached the relative safety of the armored vehicles. With all personnel accounted for, Maria led the convoy through the gap one final time. Knowing that the enemy would soon close this escape route permanently, the enemy had begun moving forces to intercept them at other points along the mountain road, making speed essential for their survival. They needed to reach areas with better radio communication and potential support from headquarters. The escape through the gap went smoothly, with both vehicles making it through despite increasingly accurate enemy fire. As they emerged on the far side of the boulder formation, Maria could see enemy fighters attempting to pursue on foot, but the vehicle's speed advantage made it impossible for ground forces to keep pace. The immediate threat was neutralized, but they still faced a dangerous journey back to friendly territory. Maria's leadership during the ambush had saved every member of her team, but she knew the mission was far from over. The enemy would likely have forces positioned along their planned return route, and the damaged vehicles might not survive another sustained engagement. They needed to find an alternative path to safety while maintaining communication with headquarters about the enemy's capabilities and positions. The successful breakout from the ambush had revealed important intelligence about enemy operations in the region. The sophistication of their equipment and coordination suggested a significant military presence that headquarters needed to know about immediately. However, getting that information to headquarters required reaching an area where radio communications were possible, something that might prove as challenging as escaping the original ambush. As the convoy moved away from the ambush site, Maria began planning their route home while reflecting on the split-second decisions that had saved her team's lives. The unconventional tactics she had employed went against standard military doctrine, but the unique circumstances had required creative solutions that no textbook could have prepared her for. The convoy raced through the mountain roads at dangerous speeds, with Maria constantly scanning for signs of additional enemy forces while trying to maintain control on the winding paths. The damaged vehicles were showing increasing signs of stress, with the second vehicle's engine producing concerning noises and visible smoke. They needed to find a safe location to assess their situation and plan their next moves before mechanical failures left them stranded in enemy territory. Private Chen continued monitoring the radio frequencies, hoping to find a channel clear of jamming that would allow them to contact headquarters. The enemy's sophisticated communication blocking seemed to extend far beyond the ambush site, suggesting a larger operation than anyone had anticipated. Every few minutes he caught fragments of distant transmissions, but nothing clear enough to establish reliable contact with friendly forces. After 20 minutes of high-speed driving, Maria spotted what appeared to be an abandoned mining facility carved into the mountainside. The access road was partially concealed by overgrown vegetation, making it an ideal location to hide the vehicles while they regrouped and treated the wounded. She made the decision to investigate, knowing they desperately needed time to assess their situation without the immediate pressure of pursuit. The mining facility proved to be exactly what they needed. Several large buildings provided concealment for the vehicles, while elevated positions offered excellent visibility of the surrounding terrain. Most importantly, the elevated location seemed to be above the worst effects of the enemy jamming, as Private Chen immediately began receiving clearer radio signals from various military frequencies. Sergeant Rodriguez organized a defensive perimeter, while Maria conducted a quick assessment of their casualties and equipment status. They had been incredibly fortunate during the ambush, with only 3 soldiers sustaining minor wounds that could be treated with their field medical supplies. However, both vehicles had sustained significant damage that would affect their performance during any future engagements. The intelligence they had gathered about enemy capabilities was crucial for headquarters to understand the true scope of the threat in the region. The sophisticated jamming equipment, coordinated ambush tactics, and apparent numerical strength suggested a major enemy operation that went far beyond the scattered activity mentioned in their original briefing. This information could prevent other units from walking into similar traps. Private Chen finally established contact with headquarters, though the signal remained weak and subject to occasional interference. The initial report of their situation caused immediate concern among the command staff, who had received no indication of significant enemy presence in their patrol area. Maria provided a detailed account of the ambush and their current status, while requesting immediate support for their return journey. The response from headquarters was both encouraging and troubling. A rescue force was being organized, but it would take several hours to reach their current position due to the difficult mountain terrain. More concerning was the news that 2 other patrols in adjacent areas had failed to report in at their scheduled times, suggesting the enemy operation might be even larger than Maria's team had discovered. Maria realized they faced a difficult decision about whether to remain hidden at the mining facility or attempt to return to base independently. Staying put would be safer in the short term, but the enemy might eventually locate their position and trap them with limited escape options. Moving would be dangerous with their damaged vehicles, but it would give them more control over their fate. The decision was complicated by the deteriorating condition of the second vehicle. The engine damage was becoming more severe, and Sergeant Rodriguez estimated they might have only an hour of driving time before complete mechanical failure. If they chose to move, they would need to travel fast and reach safety before the vehicle became completely inoperable. During their planning discussion, Private Martinez, despite his wounded shoulder, volunteered to take point position in scouting their potential escape routes. His local knowledge of the mountain roads proved invaluable, as he identified several alternative paths that might avoid enemy observation while leading toward friendly territory. The routes were more dangerous due to steep grades and narrow passages, but they offered better concealment than the main roads. Maria made the tactical decision to attempt an immediate return to base using the alternative routes. The arrival of the rescue force was still hours away, and remaining stationary gave the enemy too much time to organize pursuit operations. By moving quickly through unexpected routes, they could maintain the initiative while minimizing their exposure to additional ambushes. The preparation for departure revealed both the professionalism and the courage of Maria's mixed unit. Despite their different backgrounds and training, the soldiers had bonded during the ambush and were working together with remarkable efficiency. Veterans were sharing tactical knowledge with newer soldiers, while specialists were contributing their unique skills to solve problems outside their normal areas of responsibility. As they prepared to leave the mining facility, Maria received an updated radio message from headquarters that changed everything. Aerial reconnaissance had finally located the main enemy force, revealing a concentration of several hundred fighters with heavy weapons and vehicles positioned throughout the mountain region. The scale of the enemy operation was far larger than anyone had imagined, turning their patrol's survival into a matter of strategic importance. The enemy's apparent objective was to control key mountain passes that would cut off several military bases from their supply lines and reinforcements. Maria's patrol had inadvertently discovered the early stages of a major offensive operation that could threaten the entire regional security situation. Their survival and the intelligence they carried had become crucial for the broader military response. With this new understanding of their situation's importance, Maria felt the weight of responsibility intensify. They were no longer just trying to save their own lives, but potentially preventing a strategic disaster that could affect thousands of military personnel and civilians. The information they carried about enemy positions, capabilities, and intentions needed to reach headquarters regardless of the personal risks involved. The departure from the mining facility was executed with military precision despite the challenging circumstances. Maria led the convoy using the alternative route that Private Martinez had recommended, while maintaining radio contact with headquarters to provide real-time intelligence about enemy positions they observed during their movement. Every piece of information could be vital for the incoming rescue operations and broader military response. The mountain road proved as treacherous as expected, with steep drops on one side and rocky walls on the other. The damaged vehicles struggled with the demanding terrain, particularly the second vehicle, which was operating well beyond its normal capabilities. However, the concealment provided by the narrow canyon roads made it unlikely that enemy forces could observe their movement from a distance. Halfway through their planned route, they encountered an unexpected obstacle that would test Maria's leadership once again. A rock slide had blocked the road completely, apparently caused by recent weather rather than enemy action. The alternative routes would require significant backtracking through areas where enemy forces might have established new positions since their original ambush. Maria climbed out of her vehicle to assess the situation personally, knowing that the decision she made in the next few minutes could determine whether her team reached safety or faced another life-threatening engagement. The blocked road presented challenges that would require both creative problem-solving and calculated risk-taking to overcome. Standing before the massive rock slide that blocked their escape route, Maria quickly assessed their limited options while her team waited for orders. The pile of boulders and debris stretched across the entire width of the narrow mountain road, some rocks weighing several tons, and clearly impossible to move with their available equipment. Behind them, returning to the mining facility would mean traveling through areas where enemy forces might have established new positions. Sergeant Rodriguez joined her examination of the obstacle, his experienced eyes searching for any possible way to clear a path wide enough for their vehicles. The rock slide appeared fresh, with loose stones still settling occasionally, suggesting it had occurred within the past few days. Some of the smaller rocks could potentially be moved by hand, but the larger boulders would require heavy machinery they simply didn't possess. Private Chen continued monitoring radio frequencies and reported increasing enemy communication activity in their general area. The intercepted transmission suggested that enemy forces were actively searching for their patrol, with multiple units being deployed along various mountain roads. Time was running out before they would face another confrontation, this time potentially with a larger and better prepared enemy force. Maria noticed a narrow deer trail that wound up the steep mountainside beside the rock slide, apparently used by local wildlife to navigate around natural obstacles. The path was barely wide enough for a person on foot and would require abandoning their vehicles, but it offered a potential route past the blocked road. However, traveling on foot would leave them vulnerable to enemy forces and make it impossible to transport their more seriously wounded soldiers. The tactical situation demanded another unconventional solution, and Maria's mind raced through possibilities that might allow them to overcome this new obstacle. She observed that while the rock slide blocked the road completely, there was a narrow gap between the largest boulder and the canyon wall that might be wide enough for a single person to squeeze through. This gap could potentially be enlarged with careful work and improvised tools. Working with the materials available in their vehicles, the team began an desperate attempt to create a passage through the rock slide. Tire irons, entrenching tools, and even rifle barrels were used as levers to move smaller rocks and widen the crucial gap. The work was dangerous, as shifting one rock could cause others to move unpredictably, potentially crushing anyone working in the confined space. Private Martinez, despite his wounded shoulder, volunteered to work in the most dangerous position due to his smaller stature and ability to fit through tighter spaces. His determination inspired the entire team as they worked frantically to clear enough debris for their vehicles to pass. Every few minutes, someone would pause to listen for approaching enemy forces while others continued the exhausting physical labor. After an hour of intensive work, they had managed to create a passage barely wide enough for their vehicles, though navigation would require exceptional driving skill and precise maneuvering. The gap between rocks left only inches of clearance on each side, meaning that any mistake could result in a vehicle becoming wedged permanently between immovable boulders. Maria made the decision to personally drive the lead vehicle through the passage, knowing that if anyone became trapped, it should be the commanding officer rather than one of her soldiers. The responsibility of leadership meant accepting the greatest risks when the situation demanded personal sacrifice. Sergeant Rodriguez would follow with the second vehicle if the first passage attempt proved successful. The approach to the narrow gap required reducing speed to almost walking pace while maintaining enough momentum to climb over the loose rocks scattered on the passage floor. Maria felt every scrape and bump as the vehicle's armor made contact with the surrounding boulders, the grinding noise of metal on stone echoing through the canyon. Private Chen braced himself in his position while monitoring for any signs that the vehicle was becoming stuck. Halfway through the passage, the vehicle's left side became wedged against a protruding rock that hadn't been visible from their original assessment position. Forward movement stopped completely, and attempts to reverse were blocked by rocks that had shifted behind them. For several terrifying minutes, it appeared that Maria's gamble had failed, and the vehicle would remain permanently trapped in the rock slide. However, Private Chen noticed that the obstructing rock was actually balanced precariously on several smaller stones beneath it. By carefully removing some of the supporting material, they might be able to shift the larger rock enough to free the vehicle. The work would require someone to crawl underneath the vehicle while it remained wedged between massive boulders, an extremely dangerous proposition. Maria immediately volunteered for this hazardous task, but Sergeant Rodriguez firmly refused to allow his commanding officer to take such a risk. Instead, he squeezed through the gap beside the vehicle and began the careful work of undermining the obstructing rock. His movements were deliberate and controlled, knowing that any mistake could result in being crushed beneath tons of stone. The tension was unbearable as the team waited while Sergeant Rodriguez worked in the confined space beneath their trapped vehicle. Every small sound seemed amplified in the narrow canyon, and everyone was acutely aware that enemy forces could arrive at any moment while they remained helplessly stuck in the rock slide. The success or failure of this desperate effort would determine whether they escaped or faced capture. After 20 minutes of careful work, Sergeant Rodriguez signaled that he had removed enough supporting material to attempt freeing the vehicle. Maria started the engine and applied gradual pressure, while her experienced sergeant continued to guide the rock's movement from his dangerous position. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the obstructing boulder began to shift away from the vehicle's side. The moment of freedom came suddenly as the rock finally moved enough to allow passage. Maria immediately drove forward through the remaining section of the narrow gap, emerging on the far side of the rock slide with a tremendous sense of relief. The first vehicle was through, proving that the passage was viable despite the terrifying moments when success seemed impossible. Sergeant Rodriguez followed with the second vehicle, benefiting from the path-clearing work that had been accomplished during the first passage attempt. His driving was masterful as he navigated the tight spaces and unstable footing, bringing the damaged vehicle safely through the obstacle that had threatened to end their escape attempt. Both vehicles were now on the far side of the rock slide with clear road ahead. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission from headquarters as they resumed their journey toward safety. The rescue force had encountered enemy resistance and was being delayed, meaning Maria's team would need to continue their independent return to base. However, the news also included coordinates for a secure landing zone where helicopter evacuation might be possible. If they could reach it within the next 2 hours, the race against time intensified as Maria pushed their damaged vehicles toward the designated evacuation point. The second vehicle was showing increasing signs of mechanical failure, but Sergeant Rodriguez coaxed every possible mile from the struggling engine while monitoring for complete breakdown. They were so close to safety that mechanical failure now would be particularly devastating. As they crested a hill that provided their first view of the evacuation landing zone, Maria felt a surge of hope that quickly turned to concern. The designated area was clearly visible in the valley below, but enemy forces had apparently anticipated their movement and were positioning to intercept them before they could reach the safety of the evacuation zone. The final challenge of their ordeal was about to begin. The sight of enemy forces positioned between their convoy and the evacuation landing zone presented Maria with perhaps the most challenging tactical situation of the entire ordeal. Through her binoculars, she could see approximately 30 enemy fighters spread across defensive positions that commanded excellent fields of fire over the approach routes to the landing zone. They had clearly anticipated the convoy's movement and prepared accordingly. The timing was critical, as headquarters had confirmed that evacuation helicopters would arrive at the landing zone in exactly 45 minutes. Missing this window would mean waiting for another extraction opportunity that might not come for hours, during which time enemy reinforcements could make the situation completely hopeless. Maria had to find a way to reach the landing zone despite being outnumbered and outgunned by prepared defensive positions. Sergeant Rodriguez studied the terrain through his own optical equipment, noting that the enemy had positioned themselves to cover the main approach road, but might have weaknesses along the steeper terrain to either side. However, their damaged vehicles would struggle with the difficult ground conditions, particularly the second vehicle, which was already operating beyond its normal capabilities. Private Shen intercepted radio communications indicating that the enemy commander was confident of preventing any escape attempt. The intercepted messages revealed that additional enemy forces were moving to reinforce the blocking positions, meaning that any delay would only make their situation worse. Maria realized that immediate action was necessary, regardless of the apparent odds against success. The plan that formed in Maria's mind was perhaps the most audacious of their entire escape attempt. Instead of trying to fight through the enemy positions or find an alternative route, she would use the element of surprise by approaching the landing zone from an unexpected direction. The steep terrain on the eastern side of the valley offered concealment, but would require abandoning the vehicles and proceeding on foot. However, Abandoning the vehicles would leave her wounded soldiers without protection and make them extremely vulnerable during the final approach to the evacuation zone. Maria needed a solution that would allow them to maintain the mobility and protection of their armored vehicles while avoiding the deadly crossfire of the enemy. Defensive positions. The breakthrough came when Private Martinez pointed out a maintenance road that serviced the communication towers on the ridge above the landing zone. The road was barely visible through the vegetation and appeared to wind around the backside of the valley, potentially allowing them to approach the landing zone from above rather than across the valley floor where enemy forces expected them. The maintenance road was clearly not designed for military vehicles, with steep grades and tight turns that would challenge even undamaged equipment. Their battered convoy would be pushed to absolute limits, but the route offered the possibility of bypassing the enemy positions entirely. Maria made the decision to attempt this final gamble, knowing that mechanical failure on the steep road would leave them stranded with no alternatives. The ascent began immediately, with both vehicles struggling against the steep incline while Maria maintained radio contact with the incoming evacuation helicopters. The pilots were informed of their unconventional approach route and adjusted their timing accordingly. Every minute counted as the enemy forces below remained focused on the main approach routes, unaware of the convoy's movement along the ridge above them. Halfway up the maintenance road, the second vehicle finally succumbed to its accumulated damage, the engine seizing completely with a grinding noise that echoed across the valley. Sergeant Rodriguez immediately organized the transfer of personnel and essential equipment to Maria's vehicle, which would now carry the entire team for the final push to the landing zone. The overloaded vehicle groaned under the additional weight as Maria continued the climb toward the ridge. The engine temperature gauge climbed dangerously high, but she maintained steady progress while Private Chen coordinated with the evacuation helicopters that were now visible in the distance. They were so close to salvation that mechanical failure now would be heartbreaking. As they crested the ridge and began the descent toward the landing zone, Maria could see the enemy positions spread across the valley floor below them. The fighters were still focused on the main approach routes, completely unaware that their quarry was approaching from directly above their positions. The element of surprise remained intact for what would hopefully be the final minutes of their escape. The descent proved even more treacherous than the climb, with loose gravel and steep grades threatening to send the overloaded vehicle into an uncontrolled slide. Maria's driving skills were tested to their absolute limits as she maintained control while navigating the narrow maintenance road. Behind them, dust clouds marked their passage, but the enemy forces below seemed not to notice the activity on the ridge. The evacuation helicopters arrived exactly on schedule, their distinctive rotor noise echoing through the valley as they approached the designated landing zone. Maria could see the lead pilot scanning the area for signs of the convoy, while door gunners prepared to provide covering fire if necessary. The sight of friendly aircraft filled every team member with hope that their ordeal was finally nearing an end. However, the sound of approaching helicopters finally alerted the enemy forces to the convoy's actual location. Rifle fire began impacting around their vehicle as enemy fighters repositioned to engage the unexpected threat from above. Some enemy forces began climbing toward their position, while others tried to target the incoming helicopters with whatever anti-aircraft weapons they possessed. Maria pushed the struggling vehicle to maximum speed for the final dash to the landing zone, while Private Chen and other team members returned fire at the pursuing enemy forces. The helicopter pilots immediately recognized the situation and began evasive maneuvers while maintaining their approach to the extraction point. The aircrew's professionalism and courage under fire exemplified the military brotherhood that Maria had experienced throughout her career. The vehicle reached the landing zone just as the first helicopter touched down, its rotor wash creating a whirlwind of dust and debris that provided additional concealment from enemy fire. Maria's team immediately began boarding the aircraft while maintaining defensive positions to protect the evacuation process. Every second counted as enemy forces continued their pursuit up the steep terrain. Sergeant Rodriguez was among the last to board, ensuring that all personnel and sensitive equipment were safely loaded before securing his own position in the helicopter. His leadership throughout the ordeal had been exemplary, demonstrating the professional competence that made military units effective even under the most challenging circumstances. As the helicopters lifted off from the landing zone, Maria looked down at the enemy forces who were still climbing toward their former position. The pursuit had failed by mere minutes, illustrating how narrow their margin of survival had been throughout the entire escape sequence. Every decision, every risk taken, and every moment of courage had been necessary for their successful extraction. The flight back to base provided time for reflection on the extraordinary events of the past several hours. Maria's unconventional leadership had saved every member of her diverse team while gathering crucial intelligence about enemy capabilities that would inform future operations. The mixed unit that had begun as strangers had bonded into an effective fighting force through shared adversity and mutual trust. The intelligence they provided to headquarters proved instrumental in disrupting the enemy's planned offensive operations. The detailed information about enemy positions, equipment, and capabilities allowed military planners to organize effective countermeasures that prevented the strategic disaster that had been developing in the mountain region. Maria's patrol had inadvertently discovered and helped neutralize a major threat to regional security. In the weeks that followed, Maria's leadership during the ambush and escape became a case study in military academies, demonstrating how unconventional tactics and decisive leadership could overcome seemingly impossible odds. However, for Maria herself, the most important outcome was that every soldier under her command had returned home safely to their families. The diverse team that had faced death together remained close long after their military service ended, bound by the shared experience of survival against overwhelming odds. Their story became a testament to the courage and ingenuity that ordinary people can display when faced with extraordinary circumstances, and the power of effective leadership to inspire others to achieve what seems impossible.